For our project, we did sensory evaluation of dark chocolate with varying amounts of cacao. So an introduction to chocolate and our project. Chocolate's one of the most popular foods around the world. It's made from the seed of Theobroma cacao tree, and the flavor of the chocolate is determined by climatic factors as well as processing. So climatic factors during the growing season would be like sunlight, light intensity, rainfall, etc. And processing, you're going to have the conching and the fermentation process, the roasting, things like that. So all that will influence the flavor of the chocolate as well as additives like sugar, milk, and other things. So we chose to analyze 5 attributes in this experiment. We picked bitterness, sweetness, melting, tartness, and fruitiness. And these were all attributes we thought would all help us distinguish between the products. Okay, for the methods section, we chose 4 samples of dark chocolate. They're listed in ascending order of cacao content. So for the 4 samples, we have 72% cacao, it's a Ghirardelli brand, 76% Safeway brand, 85% Safeway brand, and another 86% Ghirardelli brand. For the panelists, we had 4 panelists that participated between the ages of 22 and 39. And for consumption patterns, we found that none of us consume chocolate on a daily basis. Okay, for sample preparation, samples were prepared in separate rooms from the panelists. The samples were cut into 25 by 25 millimeter squares, and this was done just using a knife. And the brand name as well as other ridges or things on the face of the chocolate were removed using a warm spoon. And then the chocolate was allowed to cool to room temperature. And the samples were served at room temperature on a paper towel with randomized 3-digit codes. And in the sensory booth, we used water and saltine crackers provided to cleanse the palate. For training, provided is a table of all 5 attributes we were going to use to analyze our product, and the standards that were used and the intensities correlated with them that we were going to use to assign intensities to our product. So for sweetness, we used sugar, sucrose in 4 fluid ounces of water. And for melting, we used milk chocolate, which was a Hershey's bar. And for the intensities, we all met and tasted them at the same time and kind of, came up with an idea of what the intensity was. And so for bitterness, we actually performed a prop taster session with a faculty member that was present, and they were knowledgeable about the subject, so they prepared the solution for us, and it was determined that we had 2 super tasters, a taster, and a non-taster. And for tartness, we used lemon juice in solution, and for fruitiness, strawberry and blackberry jam. For the formal evaluation, samples were presented one at a time in randomized order, and these were done on a paper towel with the assigned 3-digit code. And the panelists analyzed 1 sample at a time, and they assigned intensities of all 5 attributes on a 15 centimeter line scale. And after they were done with that, they cleansed with water and had a saltine cracker. And we waited about a minute after that to serve the next sample. And all samples were presented to each panelist in the same session. And all 4 panelists went through their evaluation in the same session at the same time. So for the results, we have an ANOVA table right here. So you can see the F values for sweetness, bitterness, and fruitiness are all significant. They're above the critical value. However, for melting and tartness, these F values are not significant. They're below the critical value. And so that means that the attributes between products were negligible or not significant. So this graph right here shows mean separation using Fisher's LSD. It shows which products significantly differed from one another. So I'll run down the line right here. For sweetness, sample 378 was significantly sweeter than all 3 samples. For bitterness, samples 615 and 255 were significantly bitter than samples 378 and 637. For fruitiness, sample 255 was significantly fruitier than all the other samples. and sample 378 was significantly fruitier than sample 637. Below is a PCA plot, and you can see from the plot that sample 378, which had the lowest content of cacao, was correlated with sweetness and melting. And on the other side, you can see sample 255, which had the highest content of cacao, was associated with bitterness. So you can really see the negative correlation between sweetness and bitterness between these two products in this graph. So our results showed that the cacao content significantly impacted perception of bitterness and sweetness. The two products with the highest cacao, labeled 255 and 615, were rated as being the most bitter and were significantly more bitter than the other two products, which had a lower content of cacao. And these two products which had the lower cacao content, 637 and 378, were rated as being sweeter than the two products with the high cacao content. And one of these was significantly different, or significantly more sweet than both products, but one of them was not significant. Nevertheless, it was rated as being sweeter than the other two. These results demonstrate the negative correlation between sweetness and bitterness. As one goes up, the other goes down. And the results supported findings from other studies. For example, many other studies showed that bitterness and sweetness were the two main attributes that were easily distinguishable between panelists, and that was the case in this study. These are the two that were the most pronounced. And our experiment also showed that as the cacao content goes up, the bitterness will go up as sweetness goes down. Again, the negative correlation, which has been proven in other experiments as well. We also found there to be fruity flavors in 2 of the 4 samples. These 2 samples were the ones with the higher cacao content, and there's no fruity attributes associated with the 2 other samples. And we think this may be due to processing. However, there wasn't much literature on the subject of fruitiness in chocolates. And we think it might be due to processing, or maybe an added ingredient that wasn't on the label, but we're not sure about that. As far as the tartness and melting attributes go, the insignificant of these we think was due to similar amounts of acids between the products, and things like fat that are responsible for the melting perception. To conclude, the experiment demonstrated the ability of panelists to distinguish between dark chocolates with differing cacao content. The attributes bitterness and sweetness were most easily distinguished, which supported the work done in other experiments showing that these 2 attributes were the most easy to identify by panelists and to associate products with.